Aslında Bahar bir şeyler söyleyecek. Birlikte yapmıştık söyleşiyi. Bahar mikrofonun kapalı.
Mikrofon.
Merhaba. Biraz size hani bilmeyenler için birazcık Cory hani bahsetmek istiyorum. Kendisi özgür irade, suç, ahlaki sorumluluk, suçlama gibi alanlarda çalışmaktadır. Ve güncel çalışmalarında ise özellikle bilimde otosansürden bahsetmekte. Örneğin kalıp yargısal çalışmalarda erkeklerin lehine çıkan bir sonucu basılmasının daha zor olduğundan bahsetmekte ve yani örnek olarak veriyorum. E, Bu gibi çalışmalara yönlendiğini görüyoruz ve şöyle bir şey de söyleyebilirim. Hem Kurt ile yaptığımız çalışmada hem Cory Clark'la yaptığımız röportajda şu anda ikisine de güncel olarak e, Kurt Gray farklı siyasi görüşten insanların nasıl bir arada çalışabileceğinden bahsetmişti. Yani laboratuvarda onları nasıl bir araya getirebiliriz gibi bir konuşması vardı. Cory Clark da farklı bilimsel açıdan farklı düşünen kişileri bir araya getirip onlar nasıl bir araştırma sorusu üretebilir gibi bir çalışma üzerinden gittiğinden bahsetmişti. Bu yüzden aslında güncel bu şekilde acaba bir trend mi var diye düşündürdü bana. Bunun aslında kendisiyle konuşurken hani doğrudan çok böyle terimlerle değil de kendi fikirleriyle konuşması ile hani çok kolay bir konuşmaydı belirli açılardan. O yüzden umuyorum sizin için de izlemesi keyifli olur diye düşünüyorum. Buyurun.
Hemen paylaşıyorum. Görebiliyorsunuz galiba, değil mi?
Evet.
Hı.
I thought about that one for a little bit and I couldn't think of any like good findings. But one thing that I've been seeing, it's actually more of like a change in scientific norms that relates to moral psychology, which is that it seems that some of the most prestigious science journals are now adding extra like moral criteria to their publication guidelines where they're potentially going to reject or retract papers that have potential to undermine the dignity of human social groups. So there's like a moral assumption there about the harms of science itself that, so far as I can tell, is based completely on their own intuitions about what is harmful. So I think moral psychology could be really helpful there in testing whether these claims that are affecting editorial policy are actually correct.
Yeah, I watched one of your interviews and you said like you had problem with publishing a paper for 7 years. Like because it's about
I have
gender.
two papers that I've struggled to publish for 7 years. And yeah, I literally got comments from a reviewer that were like, I'm afraid that this could undermine progressive values. And I'm like, is that a legitimate reason to reject a paper? But apparently it is. But I don't even know if that's true. So there are a lot of assumptions happening that are affecting moral and political psychology as well. So I try to think about that one. One thing that I think I'm seeing, for better or for worse, is that people are a little bit less interested in theoretical moral psychology and more interested in applied moral psychology. And that seems to be where all the money and funding is going. So I think the years of just trying to understand moral psychology might be behind us, and we're going to be forced to become a more proactive discipline that's actually solving the world's problems and not just, kind of doing the philosophical component of moral psychology. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It'll probably be a little bit less fun for some people, but I think the field will probably start moving in that direction if it isn't already. the one that I think is the most helpful is to always maybe always use an evolutionary framework when you think about moral psychology. I think when moral psychology tends to go down a dead end, it tends to be because it's ignored the moral framework. And I think whenever you're coming up with a particular hypothesis, you should ask yourself, how would this promoted fitness? And if your answer is it doesn't, or it would actually undermine fitness, then it's probably not a good place to start from. So I think that can help rule out a set of potential hypotheses before you go down a dead end. Yeah. Yeah, maybe one is actually an issue that you brought up before, which is the sort of naturalistic fallacy component that seems to affect how the public responds to moral psychology. And so one thing you see, especially with a lot of evolutionary theories that are explaining moral psychology and human moral behavior, is if we can find the sort of like natural explanation for a particular human behavior, then it is therefore justified and it's justifiable. And I see that the public has that reaction to science findings. And I think because the public often has that reaction, scientists then have that fear. And so it's caused a lot of resistance to sort of evolutionary theories of moral psychology, because there's this fear that, oh, well, if rape had evolutionary benefits toward men, then rape is okay. And people are, I guess, afraid that if we provide these explanations for human behavior, then suddenly we'll be able to justify sort of horrible moral acts. And so I think scientists are often afraid of approaching certain topics and certain conclusions out of the concern that other scholars will judge them because they seem to be licensing immoral behavior. So I think that's probably something that interferes with approaching certain topics and certain conclusions that might be empirically true, just because there's the potential for the naturalistic fallacy to cause potentially harmful attitudes among the public. Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was thinking about this question, I was like, try not to offend anybody, because some of my friends study the topics that I think have been studied very extensively. I personally don't think we need a lot more research on, the trolleyology stuff that was really popular in like the early 2000s. And I think we've about exhausted ourselves on that topic. I also, and this is related to things we were talking about earlier, I heard that they're developing a new moral foundations survey, or they already did or something. And I'm not sure I see that as particularly fruitful, especially when it's essentially empirically indistinguishable from other theories. And also I'm a little skeptical of the political differences in the moral foundations. So some of those things I think have been overstudied. And now that we're, in a period of social turmoil, I suppose, global turmoil, I do think something we probably haven't studied sufficiently is the sort of like peace side of intergroup and interpersonal conflict. So I think because we kind of have a psychology that's more interested in problems and like the negative side of things, we're really focused on intergroup conflict and interpersonal conflict, but not so much how we maintain interpersonal and intergroup peace, and what all has to happen to maintain that, which is a very precarious position, as we can see. So I think thinking a little bit more about if we can't manipulate human psychology to facilitate interpersonal and intergroup peace, I think something moral psychologists could be looking at is the sort of economic features and like the government interventions that potentially help with that. And then how do they help with that? Because I'm a little bit persuaded that moral psychology might not necessarily tell us much about how that is maintained, and we have to think sort of what are the incentives that affect people and allow peace to flourish. But that's a really complicated question, so maybe that's why it's not studied, is it's really hard. Whereas, you know, doing the, you know, trolley problems is much easier, and it's more fun for people. So I think we kind of have a bias toward asking the fun questions and not asking the really, really, really hard ones that are potentially more important.
Aa, Eylem hocam bir şey soracak galiba.
Yok, alkış yaptım
Ha,
ben.
tamam, pardon, ben el kaldırma zannettim.
Emeklerinize sağlık. Gerçekten Bahar'ın da sizin de aslında bütün bu ekibin çok güzel bir röportaj olmuş. Şimdi bundan sonra bir panelimiz olacak sanırım. İsterseniz ben onu duyurabilirim. Yuvarlak masa olacak. Saat 12'yi 10 geçe başlıyor olacak. Dolayısıyla bir 30 dakikalık aramız var şu anda. 30 dakika olmayacak hatta galiba ara. Şu an çok iyi hesaplayamadım. 12'ye 10 geçe burada tekrar buluşmak üzere diyebiliriz şu anda. Teşekkürler geldiğiniz ve dinlediğiniz için.